Welcome, everybody, to the circle. I am your host, Brian Piergrossi. Blessed to be with you. Blessed to have all of you with us live. Blessed to have all of you who will be watching this at some other point, some other place in time and space in the universe. And blessed to have Truth Eye with us. Welcome, Truth Eye. Great to have you with us. Glad you're here. Somebody
Pleasure to.
said, somebody in the circle said to me yesterday, "Who's Truth Eye?" And I said, "Come and find out
Hmm.
who he is." But no, you, let's see, you're a musician, a rapper, I would say, a philosopher. Uh, I was mentioned before the podcast. I think you have a great understanding of like the geopolitical world. So you study things in that realm. Um, you're a steady presence at the Asheville Farmers Market, and
Mhm.
you and your wife are the co-founders of Chocolate Church in Asheville, which
Yep.
has been happening. How many years has it been happening now?
So officially, it began early 2018.
Okay, so like 7 years. Yeah,
And for some years before that, but it kind of
consistent.
crystallized.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I think I was gonna say. I think even before that it was happening like here and there, right? And then it kind of came consistently
Yep.
before that.
Yep.
Yeah, and that's one of the things I think one of the things that I think is inspiring, commendable about you is the way you show up consistently. And that's something people say about me too, but I noticed it in you. Like you're just week after week, you're just there, just there, dedicated to it, committed to it. And that's awesome because that steady commitment is really what builds the community, right?
Mm.
Knowing that there's that presence that's there, same time, same place. I know you move it around sometimes when necessary, but essentially the
Yep.
same time, same place. So we'll get into that. Um, but I wanted to kind of start at the beginning and share some of I know a little bit of your story, and I think it's a pretty powerful story. So I kind of wanted to just share a little bit of your story with folks. So I know you grew up in South Jersey, right?
I grew up in more central Jersey, I
Okay.
guess, like center of the state. I was closer to New York than Philly.
Okay.
Uh, I was born in Durham, North Carolina, but I didn't live there very long, just a couple of years. And then we moved up to New Jersey. And then from there, on my 13th birthday, we moved to Wilmington, Delaware, to a suburb of Wilmington called Greenville, which is a very interesting place. Pretty much all DuPonts and their cousins and descendants and so on. And then on my 18th birthday, my family happened to move back to North Carolina. I had gotten into Wake Forest University, and my family moved to Raleigh pretty much concurrently. And then I transferred after my first year at Wake over to UNC Chapel Hill, and that's where I was for about the next 8 years.
Okay. At what point did you become a Philadelphia Eagles fan?
Oh man, born and raised.
Congratulations on the Super Bowl victory.
Hey man, go birds. Um, my grandparents lived in Philly, and so even though we live closer to New York, we usually went to Philadelphia. And my dad started taking me to Phillies games and Eagles games probably when I was about 7 or 8 years old.
Okay.
Yep.
Yeah, so you go to college and then at some point you have like a horrific accident, right? Like kind of like a yeah, so tell us about that.
Yeah. So I graduated from Carolina December of 2000, and in within about 2 weeks, I moved out to Breckenridge, Colorado, and I had driven out there in October of that year, and basically drove all the way to Breckenridge, applied for a job in person as a lift operator, and then got the job, and then drove all the way back to Chapel Hill. And so then I graduated a couple months later, and then within 2 weeks of that, I think we left. A friend of mine decided to tag along with me, and we left the East Coast. I believe it was January 1st or 2nd of 2001. And we drove out to Breck, and I worked on the mountain for 4 months. I felt like it was my reward for enduring however many years of continuous education or indoctrination or however you call it. And it was a wonderful ski season. I had the time of my life, became a really good skier. And then on the second to last day of the season, April 19th, which if you know history, April 19th is a very interesting date where a lot of crazy things have happened. And on that day, my friend and I had gone and we were doing some backcountry skiing and having a great time. And then on our way back to Breck, we had Vail passes, so we could ski at all the Vail resorts for free. And we stopped at a place called Arapahoe Basin, which is considered one of the top extreme ski resorts in the country. And we were just like, oh, let's go take a run at A Basin. And so we got on the chairlift and we're headed up the chairlift. And as we're headed up, the clouds rolled in and everything changed. It was so surreal, actually, looking back on it, because, a day that becomes memorable in your mind, you start to see all the details of it and like the timing of these clouds rolling in. And it was a beautiful day beforehand. But right as we're riding up the chair, these clouds come over the mountain, and then all of a sudden it's gray and overcast and the light changed. It was suddenly very gray light, and with or without goggles on, you couldn't really tell whether the terrain was sideways or went down or up. And in retrospect, we should have really chosen the safest way to get off the mountain. But being young and cocky and full of confidence or overconfidence, we decided to go down this one run, which is full of boulder fields and a lot of kind of extreme terrain. So we got to the top of this chute, and I remember my friend that I was with, that I lived out there with, he was a slightly better skier than me. And usually I would let him pick the run and I would follow him. But for whatever reason, that day, I said something smart to him and then jumped in this chute. And almost immediately, I realized that it was not a good scene. But, it was icy. It was narrow, kind of like that, almost like a bobsled run kind of a feeling. I couldn't turn. I couldn't stop. I could see the bottom, but I couldn't see really what was in front of me. And the next thing I knew, I decided to ski, just to like ski out of the chute. Next thing I knew, I was about 20 or 25 feet off the ground, going really fast. And I had this moment of seeing my ski tips. I had this fluorescent yellow V on my ski tips, and I'm just like in midair. And I'm like, oh man, two thoughts happened. One was, I'm going to get messed up. And then the second thought right before I hit the ground was, oh, maybe I'll be all right. But I landed on my left leg in a crag. Essentially, it was maybe like, I don't know, 8 to 10 feet wide. And it was surrounded by jagged rocks on all sides. And somehow I hit, and I guess my left leg pretty much exploded, and I flipped over and landed on my right side. And I have no idea how I didn't bounce into these rocks and shatter my body and leave this world. So that was the turning point. That was the moment where I felt like, looking back on it, whoever I was died in that fall, and whoever I was to become was born in that fall. And it was maybe like a year or two of toddler age in my new self. But it was that was like the pivotal moment of my life, and caused a great deal of soul searching and processing of mortality at an age that I didn't really expect to be doing those things.
How old were you at that point?
It was about 2 months before my 23rd birthday.
So 22 officially.
Yep.
How long was the physical recovery?
Oof. Well, I guess what happened was I ended up with a compound fracture of my tibia fibula, left leg. My boot saved my leg because, without getting too graphic, when the bone broke, the boot caught it and prevented, what the doctor said would have been catastrophic to the vasculature. And, it just basically would have gone all the way around. And so my boot saved my leg. And I had a 14-inch titanium rod inserted in my tibia. Uh, that's still there. I was on crutches for just about 6 months, and I had just gotten off of crutches like 2 days before 9/11 happened. And I remember vividly that day, like, my dad waking me up. I had moved back in with my family, essentially when I had gotten out of surgery in Vail, and I remember, just the floppiness of my foot. It was basically like it was the thickness of my forearm. My leg was as skinny as my arm, and I had no ability to control my foot, and I was just like flopping around. And then I began physical therapy. That lasted for months, and all in all, I would say it was a year before I was walking normally again. And then, yeah, I mean, it was a long haul. I had been a pretty good athlete before that, and it changed. I wasn't able to run and play basketball anymore because the pounding, the impact would just, throb in that break site. And that lasted for a bunch of years before I could really even like go for a run.
And how about what were the shifts that started to happen like internally, in your consciousness, meant psychologically, spiritually?
I mean, looking back on it, I can say that there was something spiritually stirring in me in the few years before that accident, but I recognize how my ego mind really kind of blocked that out and kept sort of putting the ego blinders back on. I was just like I was starting to become aware that there was something incredibly magical and terrifying about this reality and the truth of this reality. And there were some glimpses that I caught, but I really wasn't ready to look directly at it. And I felt like on some level, that's why, Spirit gave me that push and was just like, bloop, off you go, buddy. Good luck, keeping your shell intact with this one. So it was really a rebirth, of having to walk again. I lived with my parents for 9 months, so it was like another gestation period of, as I was learning to walk again. And then I moved back out. Ended up moving back to Chapel Hill, which I thought I was done with. I was intending to, move to LA and start pursuing music, and that didn't happen for a handful of years. It eventually did happen, but I was in Chapel Hill, and it was an odd time. I was starting to have this knowledge of myself, and this knowledge of the world and of God, and it was I was a little ahead of the curve at that time, and there weren't a lot of people around me, except for one, that was really a beautiful reflection at that time. But it was a time when there wasn't such thing as a conscious community around me, and it was kind of a time to just sit with myself. I was a writer at that point. I had started writing in college, and I was really channeling like spoken word poetry and rhymes earlier, before my accident. And then after my accident, I looked back on some of the stuff that I'd written beforehand, and I had this kind of collision between wherever my creative source was and the lower self, or the self that I identified with, becoming the same thing. at one point, and that was like summer of 2002, so about a year later. And that was around the time that I got my name. My birth name, my parents named me Timothy, and I had been getting really, I was reading a lot of spiritual material, and I'd come across this translation of Timothy as from Timotheus from Greek, meaning fear of God or God fearing, and I didn't resonate with that. The idea that the name Tim was basically the same syllable that we find in timid and intimidate and timorous, and I was just like, I can't do that, because I had that moment of like meeting God, and going, wow, this is actually a reality based on love, and fear and love are polar opposites. And if I'm in love, then I can't be in fear. And if I'm in fear, then I can't be in love. So it was that summer of 2002 that I just, in one of my books of rhymes, I wrote the letters down, TIM, and then immediately I just wrote truth I manifest. And I was like, oh, there it is. Like,
Oh,
that's
that's
who I want
me.
to, that's me. That's who I want to be in the world. I want to live for that which is greater than myself, for the truth that is greater than myself, and knowing that this world needs that. So yeah, it was a time of such incredible acceleration. And then that led me to, like, in the spring of 2003, I was I had started practicing meditation, and I was having like a really rapid acceleration of consciousness that I had no real context for. I had no spiritual teachers or mentors. It was like me and my own, experience. And I was dreaming things before they happened. I was having constant synchronicity. It was like, that brink of madness feeling of like, is this real? Like, how is my life real when all this stuff is happening, and I'm constantly getting precognitions, and I'm constantly like, sort of in the right place at the right time. And it was a lot. So I ended up giving away all my possessions and hitting the road with a backpack, headed for a rainbow gathering in Northeast Utah. And I left Chapel Hill as Tim, and I arrived back in Chapel Hill months later as Truth I. And it probably only took a week, actually, because I guess a week after I left Chapel Hill, I was in Boulder, and I performed something at an open mic. And I used to do this little intro. My name is Tim, but it's an acronym. Truth I manifest. That's the stratagem. And this dude came up to me after I had shared some rhymes at this open mic, and he was just like, he looked right at me and got in my face, and he was like, "You are Truth I." And I was like, "Well, damn. All right. I guess I was just called out. So okay, I will try that on." And it fit. It fit. It inspired me. It gave me a code. It gave me something to live into, and kind of kept me in line, because if I was going to call myself that and not live in that, then I knew the universe was going to slap me really, really hard. So I didn't dare to, live outside of that code at that time. And still, it's been my way of life.
Did you have any particular like books that helped you, or like stuff that I don't know what was even around at that time because we're a similar age. I'm thinking, man, I didn't have like the internet was kind of in its infancy, you
Yeah.
know.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
I mean, I was not really on the internet at that point.
mhm.
I had it in college. I was actually the first college class to receive a laptop when I went to Wake Forest. I was given a laptop, and I had Ethernet in my dorm room, but
Yeah.
I only used it for like, checking scores on ESPN.com and going on like hip hop chat rooms and like writing rhymes in hip hop chat rooms. And then I don't think I was really on the internet for years later. I know we didn't have it at any of the houses I lived in.
Hmm.
Um, I would go to the library and use the internet. Um, I saw somebody posted Be Here Now. I actually didn't see Be Here Now until a few years later. But I do remember the one book that really changed things for me. A friend of mine gave me a book called Egyptian Yoga, and I got into that book. And within the first few pages, it was talking about the ancient Egyptian idea of God as consciousness itself. And as soon as I read that, I was like, oh, boom, that's it. Like that's what I've been somehow aware of without the words to say it. But that's the truth right there. It's consciousness. It's not mind. It's not a man in the sky. It's not it's nothing like that. It is actually consciousness itself that precipitates all possibility. And so that was the game changer for me. And everything else kind of unfolded from there. And then I think in 2003, it was Drunvalo Melchizedek's Flower of Life, which, I think in Boulder, when I got to Boulder hitchhiking, I might have spent a couple of nights in Boulder, and the people I was staying with had that book, and I read the entire thing in an afternoon. I just could not put it down. I just inhaled the entire thing, and I was like, oh my God, like this is, I'm connected to this story. I'm connected to this ancient knowledge. I had actually, maybe I'll mention that I had had a memory of a past life experience in the year 2000, before my accident, before I graduated. I had taken an Egyptology class in the fall of 2000, and I remember seeing a slide. This archaeologist was, he had a slideshow, and he was showing these slides of places in Egypt. And when he put this slide up that showed the pyramids from a certain angle with the Sphinx in front of it, and he was talking about the Nile used to run right in front of the Sphinx, and at that moment, I suddenly had a flashback to a dream that I had when I was 12 years old, in which I was looking out a window over a river at the Nile. The Sphinx was right there. The pyramids were right there. And then there was the crazy thing. There was a light moving rapidly across the sky. It suddenly exploded and fell to earth, and exploded even more when it hit the earth. So, I mean, that detail, I still don't really have an explanation for, except, theories ultimately. But when I saw in the Egyptology class that the Nile is now 7 miles from the Sphinx and the pyramids, and back, 5,000 years ago, 6,000 years ago, the river was right there. And that's exactly what I had seen in my dream. And I could not have known that unless I'd been there. And I had this moment of kind of my head exploding. And then again, it was like an expansion, but then a contraction because I couldn't process it. So then after my accident, after, I was becoming Truth Eye, then, it was this Egyptian yoga book that helped to just kind of lead me on. So yeah, the Egyptian mysteries, and this notion of consciousness and the flower of life gets into this, the history of the flower of life in the mystery schools of ancient Egypt. And, it's the flower of life, is on the walls at the temple in Abydos. And so it was like, really, those were the codes that catalyzed me to continue to pursue and continue to be open and follow the guidance that I was getting, and follow the synchronicities, and have like infinite trust. I mean, I look back on that time, and I cannot even imagine what I was thinking or what my parents were thinking when I was like, yeah, I'm going to give away everything I own and hit the road hitchhiking with a backpack and sleep outside and eat out of dumpsters. And my parents are like, you're what now? Like, you just graduated from college and you're what?
I gotta say, like, I'm amazed how similarly our life tracks. So for me, I had a catastrophic situation when I was 20. I was a fairly normal dude before that, I would say, but I did have some
Yeah.
things percolating like you.
Yep.
In my case, it was chronic fatigue syndrome. So I just had this illness that came on and just like took me out, and I couldn't get out of bed for 6 months. Ended up like you, living with my parents again for a
mm,
while, and then and it went on for years. This illness went on for years, And that's really the whole spiritual awakening and journey started at that point. And
Wow.
then it was just like devouring. And like you, I didn't really have anybody to talk to about it.
Yep.
So, but I would kind of try to find books at the library, kind of, this and that. And I
Yep.
think, what I track too with you is like you're accessing all this truth inside yourself. And then there's a book here or a person here that kind of gives you the confirmation. They're like, oh yeah, it is true. It is right. It's what I'm feeling, because it's all inside of ourselves, right? But we need that kind of something to confirm it, something to tell us that, yeah, we're on the right track, keep
Yep.
going. So, and also like you, I um I wanted to go to LA, to Hollywood. In my
Mhm.
case, I wanted to be like a Hollywood movie star or direct. I didn't something with like Hollywood. I wanted to be in Hollywood, and
Mm.
it was like looking back now it was basically like ego. But then my whole thing got redirected, where I was like, I don't want that at all. I want to go into the spiritual, to dedicate myself to this journey and learn as much as I can, and just be one point of devotion to this. And kind of similar to you, I sort of not as overtly as you, but kind of lost interest in the material world, let's say,
Yep.
right? And just really
Yep.
dedicated myself to it. Yeah.
Yep. I mean, I was writing prolifically at that time, and I also know that really it was my writing that was reflecting back to me, like the consciousness that I was to become was already writing through me, and it was writing to me, giving me the keys and the clues, and allowing me to like really those were my mantras. My
Yeah.
rhymes were the mantras that I would use to actually step into greater embodiment and greater self-realization. And then I mean really I'll share another story just right from that middle of the summer of 2003 that was the point of no return. And the point of no return came um backstory, like when I was a little kid, I had some fairly interesting experiences. I was a lucid dreamer. I could like just like lie down in my bed and I would just like look at the ceiling, and then suddenly like I could sort of form a portal with my mind, and then I would move through it into the dream world, and I would be lucid in the dream world. And I interacted with some beings in that world that led me to, then around 7 years old, I started checking out every book at the library about ETs and UFOs and all the interesting stuff. So now 2003, the night of July 3rd, I had met someone at on my second day at the Rainbow Gathering, and he was teaching the 13 moon calendar. The law of time, Jose Arguelles,
Yeah. I know that guy.
13.
Yeah.
Yep. So July 3rd is your birthday. Well, synchronicity abounds, doesn't it? Um, so I had met this brother and this crew that were real into the 13 moon calendar, and I remember being given one of those and kind of explained how it worked. And immediately I looked at that and I was like, oh my God, this is what I came here to learn. I gave away everything and I hitchhiked out here just to learn this calendar, because it hit me so hard that time was not linear, it was cyclical. And that even in my life of the last few years prior to that, post accident, prior to the Rainbow Gathering, and this constant unfolding of synchronicities and like recursive visitations around the same themes and stuff like that. um oh, somebody handed me David Icke's Children of the Matrix, I think, in the spring of 2003 also. That was a very interesting book, and certainly allowed me to expand my sense of what might or might not be true about our world. Um, so, the 13 moon calendar accelerated something, and I was invited to participate in what I was told was a Mayan Stargate ceremony. And so I was like, cool. All right. I'm half wide open and half skeptical at the same time. I still have one foot in like my old understanding of things, and also one foot in the new understanding of things. And so I end up going back that evening to meet up with this crew. It was about probably half a mile from where I was camped. And it was dark. We lit a candle. It must have been 9 or 10 p.m. at that point, because, you know, this is Utah, so northern latitude, so around just after the summer solstice. So there was a Mayan woman, a woman of Mayan descent, and then there was 6 brothers that were there. And this woman lights a candle, and we all hold hands and put the candle on the ground in the center of the circle. And she begins just praying and singing and chanting, and she's kind of moving between English and Spanish and Quechua. And she starts calling on star nations and, you know, invoking star nations to be there with us at that gathering, to watch over the gathering, to protect the gathering, to oversee and make sure everything was good. And so I guess it was, you know, to me, it felt like it was like 15 or 20 minutes. And I remember we closed, the circle was closed. I opened my eyes. And the first thing I noticed was that this candle, which was, you know, one of those votives that's like maybe that tall and about that big around or so, had burned almost all the way down. And I was like, huh, that's crazy. It doesn't feel like we were here long enough for that candle to burn all the way down, but whatever. So, and then I turned to the guy next to me and I was like, so now what? And he goes, I'll never forget it. He looks me in the eye and he goes, well, now we wait for him to show up. And I was like, huh, word? Okay. All right. So I had my journal, I had my sleeping bag, I had my pen, probably my headlamp, and go and sit down at this bonfire at these folks' camp. And some hours go by. Now we're 80 miles from the nearest city, which was Cheyenne, Wyoming to one direction, and then Salt Lake City to the other direction, both about 80 miles. And so we're literally in the middle of nowhere, like really far from civilization, really far from light pollution. The stars were magnificent, you know, some of the most incredible stars I've ever seen. We're in a valley surrounded by mountains, and some hours go by, and I remember seeing suddenly this star hanging over the mountain, you know, directly forward of where I was sitting. And as I was watching that star, it suddenly jumped across the sky and stopped on a dime. And it happened so quick that if I had blinked, I almost would have missed it. And I was like, oh my God, what the hell was that? What did I just see? So I kept my eye on it. I'm watching it. A few minutes go by, and suddenly, boop, it jumps again and stops again. And so now, you know, there's 1 or 2 other people sitting at the fire with me. Now I'm like, hey, bro, check this out. Watch that star right there. And he watches it, and we're watching, and boop, it jumps again. And I was like, you saw that, right? He's like, yeah. I was like, okay, well, all right. Something is happening that is completely beyond my understanding. I have no explanation for it. I didn't know, you know, but over the next maybe hour or two, we saw 6 of those things that were just like jumping, stopping. Every now and then they would move real slow and then stop and float. And there was even one right above us that I saw go from super bright to like very dim. It moved just a little bit, like laterally across the sky, but it was getting smaller and smaller and smaller until suddenly we couldn't see it anymore. So it was like something was actually flying away from the earth. So then, you know, all that kind of chills out. I finally lay down in my sleeping bag. It had to be about 4 a.m. And I go to sleep, and I have a lucid dream that I was at my camp on the other side of the gathering, and I was standing next to the fire, next to the brother that I was camped with. And I was telling him everything that had happened that night, with the ceremony, with the lights jumping around in the sky. And then I wake from that to like suddenly I'm being pulled back into my waking self, and it's maybe, I don't know, it's dusk before dawn, you know, maybe like 15 or 20 minutes before dawn. So there's enough light you can see, but it's dim, it's quiet. But I hear like I heard this almost like the ocean, and I open my eyes and I hear this rushing, almost sounds like waves crashing. And I suddenly, it's getting louder and louder. And I sit up and I look up, and two F-15 fighters are coming screaming down into the valley right over the mountain where I had seen the first light, light ship or whatever. And here come these two fighter jets, and they're maybe 400 feet off the ground, and they're going real fast, not, speed of sound fast, but real fast. And they go right over us. And as they go over us, this one jet banks on its side, and I can literally see the pilot. I can see his head as he looks down and flies right over us. And then they continue down the valley, and then they peel off, and they spend the next hour circling the mountains where we had been. And they were making these sort of bigger and bigger circles until we couldn't see him anymore. So, for me, that was like a confirmation that whatever we had seen hours earlier in the middle of the night had showed up on radar, that fighters were scrambled. They came out there looking for whatever had shown up, and they didn't really find anything. But then, this is now the morning of the 4th of July at the Rainbow Gathering. And that's a very special day where at the gathering where all the adults are quiet in the woods, and the only thing you hear are children and birds. And so all the adults hold silence until there's a prayer gathering at noon at the main meadow where people hold hands, and then the silence is broken with toning, with ohms. It's quite moving, actually, to see people that are, hundreds of yards away on another hillside, and that you're connected through this chain of humans holding hands. So then after that, I walk back to my campsite, and as I'm walking into my campsite, I see the brother that I'm camping with walking out, and we're maybe 40 yards away, close enough that we can see each other's faces. And suddenly, like, tears just start streaming down my face. And I was, at that time, I would say not connected really to my emotions. I probably hadn't cried in years, maybe since my ski accident. But tears are streaming down my face. And by the time we're standing face to face, like, tears are streaming down his face, and we're looking at each other in the eye, and neither of us can even speak at that moment. And finally, I pulled it together enough to just be like, bro, I visited you last night. And he was sobbing. He was like, I know. You were standing right next to me, and I was sitting by the fire, and like, you showed up as this like light body, like remember in the Star Wars series when the Jedis who have passed show up in like their light bodies. Apparently what my dream was had actually been a projection of an astral projection, or whatever you want to call it. And then it was received on the other end, and he had actually had a conversation with me that I had experienced in my dream. And so that was the night that I passed the point of no return. Like, there was absolutely no going back to my old awareness, to my old understanding of the world, to anything that I really understood. And so I just kept walking at that point, as a seeker, as a mystic, as someone who knew that there was 100% way more going on this planet, in our reality, in our human experience, than I could have ever known, that no one had ever taught me. And, family, school, media, right? All the ways that we learn about our world, this was now something completely beyond all of that, transcendent of all of that. And so I kept walking, and that became the life that I have lived since then, with a lot of ups and downs. There was a time where I thought, that once you woke up, it was like all light, and it was all just like, okay, now you're basically like living in heaven on earth, and you just get to like be in your body, and yet you're part of this infinite consciousness, and we're these living soul beings in human form, and we get to think things and they happen, and we meet magical people, and then I had a whole initiation of the shadow side of it all, and so yeah.
You want to go into that and what that's about?
Sure. So, I guess to carry on from that time in 2003, I did end up back in Chapel Hill, and I used that as my home base for a few years. Was kind of like continuing to hitchhike back and forth. Ended up going to LA at one point, believing that I was headed on to Hawaii to just meditate in the jungle and like forget about the world. And the universe had other plans and really kind of kept me in LA. And that was where I met my wife. All in like a month, I met my wife and then moved in with her, and then got a job at a high-end retreat center in Calabasas, where I I went from being like a hitchhiker to sitting at the head of the table with like Wall Street executives and celebrities and
Yeah.
very, very successful, powerful people, politicians, but political, people running for office, people related to those that are in DC in power. I mean, really a completely surreal thing. And so, my LA experience was like on top of the world. It was like so magical. We created a conscious music scene in LA with others, and watched this beautiful blossoming. And then we moved to Asheville, and the story of it was
What
that
year
my
is
wife.
that, Truth Eye?
So that was we moved to Asheville in January of 2012,
Yep.
and
That's right around the time that I moved there too. That was like the great migration happened at
yeah,
that time with so many of us.
yeah. So
Yeah.
what catalyzed it was that Aradna had gotten pregnant, and that was like September, August, I think it was August, and then we found out in September that she was pregnant, and we had always said if she gets pregnant, we're not staying in LA, because LA is no place to raise a family. That was what I felt. Beautiful, creative people, constant, activities and stimulation and magic to pursue. But we didn't really want to raise a kid there. So we ended up, after reviewing a handful of places in the country, Asheville became our target. We came to Asheville 11, 11, 11 on our scouting mission, and we decided then we were going to move to Asheville. So we packed up. We spent the month of December packing up, and then we moved in January of 2020. And we arrived in Asheville
20,
on the
2012, you mean, right?
excuse me, yes,
Yeah.
2012. But we were arriving into Asheville right around January 20th. I think it was maybe the 22nd of January, and or I guess it was a Friday. And then that Saturday night, we had gone to Greenville to stay with a cousin of hers, and she went into labor at 24 weeks, and our son was born. We went rushing to the hospital, and our son was born at Greenville Hospital, and his heart beat for 2 hours, and he passed in our arms. And he was born probably just a week or two early. Like his lungs actually didn't work right, and so he couldn't breathe and stay in this world. And while he tried, the doctors, at one point grabbed me and said, "Look, we can try to save him, but the truth is, I don't think that he's going to make it." And so, they basically gave us the space, and they handed us back our son, and we sat there with him and held space for 2 hours while his heart beat, and then he passed. And so that was like, I mean, that was like going off of a cliff that was 10,000 feet high, as high as my life had felt from, kind of surviving that ski accident and having this awakening, and then having some maybe I don't know, eight years of like incredible magic and beautiful things happening. That was just like falling from so high and shattering everything. Like all the visions, all the plans that we had of moving to Asheville and the things that we were to pursue, it really just broke on the ground around us. And then that led to, I guess that was January. So we ended up again at my parents' house in Raleigh at that time, for maybe about 2 months, almost 2 months. Um, and then, at some point we had to, kind of complete that move. And so we came to Asheville, we settled into a place. And then there was this whole layer to that experience that was tied to a medicine keeper that we had worked with in Los Angeles for some years. And, we had sat in ceremony with him and had some really beautiful experiences for some years. He was became a very close friend and trusted teacher. And he came to Asheville around, I guess, spring of 2012 when we finally, I guess actually it was right around this time of year. It was like, what's today, the 15th? It was May 15th of 2012 that I picked him up at the Charlotte train station
It
and
was
brought
this
him down.
day today.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep. Cycles, right? 13 years today. So within a few hours, I realized something had shifted, and it was not a good scene. And, within probably the next day, the context of him coming to Asheville was, I'm going to come to Asheville and I'm going to stay with you and I'm going to help you heal from what just happened. And when he actually got here, within hours, there was this very, very sharp disconnect of who we had known previously. And he was, I don't know, he was dark in some ways. And I mean, looking back, I can say that he broke my mind. Like my mind was already broken, and it was, I was doing my best to like kind of put it back together, and it was fragile. And like within a day, he literally like snapped that and began to leverage the pain and the trauma of what we had gone through as like tied to the bad medicine that we were carrying, that like, we must be way out of alignment with God. Our marriage must be, way out of alignment. I remember he basically said, rotten fruit, sick tree. And, that was the metaphor of like losing a baby and the marriage that had created that. And so it was just like, it was a cruelty and a lack of compassion that I actually can't really even fathom. And looking back on that time, I can't even relate to being so delicate in my mind that someone outside of me could like step in and actually buckle me and then leverage fear. And that's what I actually look back and I realized it was because I was in fear. He threatened that if we didn't follow what he was saying, that if we didn't go along with his recommendations, that similar things and worse things would happen. And so it was just like it was a spiritual jujitsu move on his part that immediately brought me into like obedience and compliance. And it was cultish, it was like being sucked into having someone else make decisions for you, to think for you, to tell you how you're supposed to feel, tell you how you're supposed to act, what you're supposed to be doing in life. He was like, all right, you're done with the truth I thing. That's like all your ego. So like, you need to change your name back and all that. And then I ended up at the Taoist Traditions acupuncture school because he told me that I was done with music, that it was just all ego and all my writing and everything, which, you know, looking back, like that was my spiritual path. That was the life that I was seeking. And it was feeding my awakening and allowing me to reach people and to pass the message on, you know, to like each one reach one, each one teach one. But, you know, he impacted me so greatly that when he said these things, I went along with it. And, you know, I had to work hard to forgive myself for that later. Once we had gone through this like dark night of the soul. And I can say that going to Taoist traditions was probably the best thing that could have happened to me, because now I'm around real healers and I'm getting acupuncture every day. I'm around real healers every day. And I was getting actually exorcism treatments when I was getting acupuncture, because I had started to like, as we began to realize that this dude wasn't a good influence in our lives. And you know, I was almost like beginning to battle him in my dreams. And then I was telling my acupuncturist I've been having these really intense dreams, and like this stuff has been happening. And you know, the students are like consulting with the teachers, and the teachers are like, yeah, you need to do like an exorcism treatment, because like something's going on, you know, there's some Shen disturbance going on here. And that that experience, you know, I have all the gratitude to everyone at that school, and you know, the mission of that school, because on some level I feel like it saved my life and brought me back, and brought me back to a place where I could actually like reconnect to myself, reconnect to my wife. We had been, you know, the medicine keeper had driven a wedge between us and basically told us our marriage was toxic, that we needed, if we wanted to be married at all, that we needed to like start over. And so we were sleeping in separate rooms. We were not, you know, with each other really, other than just like roommates for a time. And it was it was super fucked, you know, if I'm to be quite honest. And then there was like a solar eclipse in November of that year, and on that day my wife had a healing session of her own, and she came back, and I remember her going off at me and just being like, nope, like this dude is done, he's out of our lives, like this is done. And I remember looking, and I saw the woman I had married that I really hadn't seen since before we moved and before losing the baby and all that. There was like, you know, she had gone through incredible trauma, and it was all worsened by the situation that we were in. And somehow, though, she was able to pull herself out of it, and then I was able to pull myself out of it to be able to hear her. And then I guess it was early December that year, and you know, the first time that we came together again, after 7 months of sleeping in separate rooms, we conceived our daughter. And it was magic, you know. It was like the reward for like a year of hell was conceiving our daughter. And so Persia was born the next year. And then I eventually withdrew from school because I had never wanted to be there in the first place. It wasn't my volition that landed me there. It was like a super bizarre detour initiation of the shadow. And you know, admittedly, like it took about 6 years to like really get to the rock bottom of that experience, and to like actually be able to confront all the levels of the trauma we had gone through, from, you know, losing a baby, and then being sucked into a cult, and then escaping. And then, you know, like life was really hard for us for a long time in Asheville. We were working our asses off trying to launch Silver Moon Chocolate and to get our music going. And it was just, and we had a baby, and it was a super heavy grind, all the way until COVID, to be honest. Like 2020, when everything stopped, that was when we actually like took a break for the first time since all that happened. And so that was a good summer for us, actually, the summer of 2020, to have, you know, some months where we were not chasing the dream and just sitting and like allowing life and all that experience of Ashevillle, the first chapter of Ashevillle and the unrelenting 8-year saga of that. Then it was like, okay, 2020, sit down, don't do anything. Nope, you're not touring. You're not, moving to this next level of chocolate and music and any of that. It's like, sit the hell down, reprioritize, figure out what is next. So,
And when, and or not so much when, but more so how does Chocolate Church come into being?
well, Chocolate Church, so when I got back to Chapel Hill in 2003, I had learned so much in months on the road, meeting teachers, spiritual people, having these transcendental experiences. I began to practice meditation. I began to practice qigong daily, and really rooted into my spiritual practices. And it was early 2004 that I basically told God, I'm here only for you. I'm here only as a vessel and only as an agent of an awakening that I began to realize was happening, because I was meeting more people that were starting to wake up. And there was a time, of like meeting spiritual people or mystic people and like almost like looking at each other, and when the realization of like, oh wait, like, don't you? And it was like, yep. And like literally, these synchronicities of and telepathic conversations with people of like, yep, okay, I look in your eyes and I can see that you know what I know, and okay, cool, we're on the same page. So I knew that was happening, and I committed myself to it in 2004. And I said, make me an instrument, make me a man of God, make me a servant, make me a priest of this awakening. And so it really started at that point of me, saying this is my path, and I will work to serve the greater awakening to God and the greater coalescing around consciousness. And so even in LA, when we first started doing chocolate, which was like 2007, right after I met Aradhana, she began working with cacao. And so we were playing a lot of music in LA, and she was bringing chocolate to all of our events. And we were doing like circles before the events began, where she would pass out cacao, and we would just come together and breathe and set intentions and pray. And then we would have these epic, kind of conscious events. And so when we came to Ashevillle, I know we did a cacao ceremony in our house, maybe like either fall of 2012 or spring of 2013. We had like no furniture, and we had filled our house with people and served cacao. And that was the first cacao ceremony that we did in Ashevillle proper. And then as we toured throughout the next handful of years, all the way up until 2018, we were doing cacao ceremony out touring at festivals. And so the Chocolate Church was always there, like the instinct and the impulse and the intention to bring cacao in as a sacrament and as a medicine, and to, then use that as a chance to create a unified field with other folks, and then to pray together and then have, experiences together. That was just continually happening. So then I guess it was sometime in 2017 we began to really be like, we need to do this. We need to use. We actually had a space. I don't know if you were ever there, but we had a kitchen in downtown Ashevillle at the corner of Charlotte Street and Chestnut, and it came with a big room. Like it was like an old cafeteria and kitchen. So we had rented the kitchen. It came with the cafeteria. we filled that with couches and chairs and a sound system and lots of cool visionary art on the walls. And then early 2018, we had the first official chocolate church in that space. And it lasted in that space for until we moved out of that space, which was probably fall of 2018. 2019. Yeah. 2019, we moved out. Then there was a few months where like Chocolate Church didn't really have a home. And then the world shut down. And I guess maybe like sometime in the fall, maybe fall 2020, we started doing Chocolate Church on Zoom. And we did some number of chocolate churches on Zoom for a
People
while.
drink their cacao at home.
Yeah. And people
Nice.
would go up ready to go with
Nice.
cacao. And then early 2021, we very risque, but we actually had people over to our house, and on the down low, we were having social gatherings of
Yep.
people at the house drinking cacao and having chocolate church in person again. And then that moved to Haw Creek Commons, and we did some months over at Haw Creek Commons outside. We dug a fire pit and began meeting outside by the fire. And then I guess in 2021, we moved out to Shope Creek in the summer. And that was when we started doing it out there and did it all the way until the hurricane at Shope Creek.
Yeah, that's when I think of you, when I think of you in Chocolate Church, I think of it as like part of it's being like in the natural realm, in the forest, in
Yeah.
the you hear the creek, you got the fire going, and it's really
It,
the
it
natural elements are really a deep part of it.
Absolutely. And once it went outside, like it was awesome in the room. We always lit a candle as the sacred fire, and we would have an altar, and we would sometimes fill the room. Um, but it really went to the next level when we were outside with a fire pit in the ground. And then 2021, 22, 23, like Chocolate Church really grew a lot of people came. And we began to have like a lot of regulars and people that just kept coming back and became part of the Chocolate Church family. And so since the hurricane, we've been doing it at our house, which typically is smaller, more intimate. We have a hill, we sit on a hill, so it's not quite as accommodating. But still, we've had some small groups consistently, and it continues to be very potent, very profound, very beautiful.
Okay, I got one more question, and then I'll open up. These guys, I'm sure, want to get some things and get involved. I
Sure.
just wanted to ask about there's a portion where you do like a Quaker style,
Mm-hmm.
which I love that, and that's actually something I have an idea for that with stuff I'm doing. But
Yeah.
how'd that come into being with Chocolate
So
Church?
so my mom comes from a Quaker family, and the Quaker ancestors of hers arrived here in 1621, and were the Quakers were the renegade mystic Christian sect that kind of occurred in the mid 1500s and had the audacity to challenge the Church of England and challenge the clergy and the status quo of like there's an intermediary between individuals and God. And the Quakers said, no, that's not how it really is. There is that of God in all, and they refer to it as the inner light, or we might call it the divine spark. But the inner light is that piece of God that dwells within all of us. And so my first spiritual teaching was me asking my mom at like 5 years old, you know, what is God? Why are people talking about God? And my mom said, Quakers believe that God is the inner light that dwells within all of us. And I was just like, oh, I know what that is. Cool. Like done. And question answered.
This little light
So
of mine, I'm gonna let it shine.
that's it. So, I high school was really like that was the most dense period of my life. That was where like I was all ego, and had formed this ego as I approached 11, 12 years old, and like those that previous sort of childhood sense of connection and mystery and all the esoteric stuff that I was already into at that point, and all the lucid dreaming and everything that really kind of went away for that period. But then it began to come back in college, and while I kept fighting it off, then right after college I couldn't fight it off anymore. And so I think I realized, the full circle thing of like, oh, well, that what my mom told me God was is actually what I discovered God to be when I was 23, 24, as that, new consciousness was really settling in. So I always loved the idea of the Quaker meeting, where there is just a group of people who come together and sit in silence, and that if the Holy Spirit moves within someone and there's a prayer that comes to mind or a reflection, at Chocolate Church we've loosened that a bit, and given people freer expression of what's alive for them in that way. So it's not just people standing up and reciting Bible verses or sort of like socially conscious little bits of wisdom. It has expanded a bit more, and has become really like a crowdsourced wisdom kind of thing, where I'm just constantly in awe of the things that people share as they either come to the fire or just share from their seats. And there was a learning curve. I feel like when we really tried to get that going here, we had a lot of people waiting for their turn to talk, and we had to consistently just over time refine, emphasize the discernment, emphasize the listening piece, emphasize that not everything that's going through your mind needs to be said out loud. And it's not the time for self stories. It's not the time for getting in and promoting yourself. And so we've continued to refine that, and just really ask people to only share something if it can improve upon the silence.
Beautiful.
Yep.
Beautiful. Well, folks, if you can improve upon the silence right now, you are welcome to share. If you have any questions, comments, reflections, the space is yours.
I'm curious, is the Chocolate Church around any particular philosophy, or do you just leave it wide open, or?
Well, thanks for your question. I would say that it is. I've walked the path of a Taoist, and kind of like a Taoist monk. I've been practicing qigong and meditation and martial arts for 20 years now. And so Taoism is a big part of my own kind of spiritual approach. But also, the Quaker seed is very much in my heart. And the idea that uh, that that the figure of Christ is alive in our hearts, and that becomes the we become an extension, we become the body of Christ as we walk in the example that he left us and the teachings that he left us. And yet, I in my spiritual explorations, I've tried on just about everything, as philosophically, ritualistically. I've practiced the rites of many different faiths in order to really get a sense of how to connect with people of other faiths and other traditions. So officially, Chocolate Church is kind of a Quaker meeting that is open to denominations of all faiths, as well as spiritual but not religious. And more than anything, I think it's at this point it's seeking to give us a way of navigating the world at this time of what I see happening is a new world is birthing, and we're experiencing the chaotic pains of labor that are shattering and will shatter basically every paradigm that we have known in the past. And so I do expect that moving forward, there will come a point where we don't even recognize the world that we live in anymore, because we've had to reinvent religion, science, education, healthcare, everything from a new place of consciousness that humanity has been previously unable to get to. But now we're past the point of no return as a collective, and it's like we're new earth or bust.
Okay.
I'll just add that he also has Cherokee elders that will be present sometimes, and so that there's that presence there, and that I think that you can feel that kind of tradition is woven in somewhere in there as well.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And
native things have been among the traditions that I have experienced with teachers and elders along the way, so for sure.
And I would just add that I think there's this distinction that's important to make between the mystical experience, which is the way I would define it is like a direct experience with the divine. And so you have this direct experience, but the experience, and it's not even to say experience, I'm already in trouble because it's not really even an experience. It transcends experience. Did we lose Truth Eye? He's not here anymore. Looks like he's gone. Okay, so there you are. I see you. It transcends everything that you can put into words, every kind of thought, every kind of idea, any kind of belief system, any kind of there's no way to talk about it. And so it's said that actually many mystics don't talk about it at all, right?
Yep.
But some
those who don't know,
right.
Those who know don't.
Exactly. But some of us try to anyway. And so then when you try to there's different frameworks to try to speak it and try to put it into a communication pattern. And so I say all that to say, like, I think that when I feel Chita, I feel him beyond whatever the modality or whatever the different framework is, and I say this when I'm sharing too, it's just like, try to feel beyond the words, try to feel a presence behind the words. So people get so caught in the words and they want to argue about the word, and it's deeper than the words, It's interesting because, Truth, I was saying after his catastrophic experience, he started doing these rhymes and lyrics and songs, and similar thing happened to me again, where all of a sudden I started writing all this poetry, which I didn't know anything about poetry before, but all this poetry started coming out of me, which later was published in a couple of books, right? But the reason it came through as poetry is because it was the only way I could attempt to talk about what I was realizing, So it's like your poetry is like, not to be taken literally, right? It's like you're pointing at something that's beyond the words. And so I think in a way it's sort of all poetry, right? And that's kind of when you get it from that perspective, it really helps you to kind of relax into the presence that's deeper than the words.
Well said.
Hi. I just want to say how much Asheville has appreciated you and your family. And I was at the very first chocolate church.
Yes,
and
you were.
I did that little painting by, of the altar.
Yeah.
And but for that.
Yes, thank you.
Okay, but for that first year or the whole time y'all were there, I was there at most of them, and of course I went to a lot of your iStar performances, and you haven't said too much about that, but I will say the music, the words that y'all bring, the energy and everything through your music is amazing. Anything y'all touch has that same wonderful expression to it, for Ashevillle and anyone who's in the vicinity to receive. But anyway, one thing that I remember was presentation you did on the ley lines of the earth. And that was so excellent. I don't know how many times or if you've done it since then, but you need to bring that back.
Oh, wow.
Especially after they took down the obelisk. It was like heart-wrenching for me to watch that be torn down because they had no knowledge,
right.
And you had brought that knowledge as a gift, but only, it wasn't received by anyone outside of that room anyway. But that's all I'm going to say. I love your family. I'm glad I opened my email and saw that you were on tonight. Always got an ear to hear what you're going to share, and Aradna as well.
Thanks so much.
Okay.
Thank you, Brenda.
My brother.
Yo.
Where are you, Jacob? What state?
We're in Florida. We just crossed into Florida about 20 minutes ago or so.
Okay.
So we've got about an hour or so left.
Giving us some Florida vibes.
Yeah, man. Heading down here to the heat. Anyways, truth, I didn't know all this stuff. I didn't know all this stuff about you, but now I know why I recognize you so well, my brother. It's good to be here with you, man. Good to be here with you. I see you. I feel all this stuff you're saying. There's so much I could say, and I would really love to get together with you, like personally, sometime, and just get out in the woods and go into it.
Cool.
Like another thing, we are very close. Like we are closer to the truth than this, whatever this we're in has ever been. And I feel it within my soul. I know you feel it within your soul. It's like you said, we recognize this in each other. And man, I see your light. I see your love. I feel it all over you every time I am near you. And I really appreciate that. I see God all over you, man. I see God's love and light. So I really appreciate I appreciate you being here, man. I appreciate you sharing tonight. I appreciate every interaction, every time our paths have crossed. I really appreciate it. I look forward to dropping in with you more.
Beautiful. Thanks, brother. You too.
Yeah, man.
Jacob. Yeah, I think one of the real themes, and Jacob has it, I know, in his story too, and probably everybody here, if we got a time for everyone's story. But it's really important to like keep this in mind is, those really difficult experiences that we have in our life that really test our limits. That is where we grow and where we awaken spiritually. Like it's not by mistake. It's there for us. It's there to break us open to this next level, this deeper level of truth inside ourselves. And so I think that's one of the real inspiring things. Like when you hear like Truth Eye's story, is just like, yeah, it's life is so painful sometimes and so difficult sometimes, and there's just like these moments where you're like, I don't know if I can get through this one, like I don't know if I can make it through this one, but you can, and you will, and it's there for you, and then you look back and you're like, yeah, I would never have understood all the things I understood and seen all the things I've seen and realized all the things I've realized if I didn't have those challenges, those trials and tribulations to open me deeper.
100%.
Anybody else want to share anything? You want to share, Truth Eye, you want to share how people can plug into
Sure.
what you're doing?
Sure thing. So we have a website, istarvision.com, and that is the home of where our music is. And I have put a couple of Qigong videos on there as well. That's an entire other project that I have been, really kind of moving towards bringing to life for years, really. But trying to take all the teachings of Qigong and the metaphysics that I've been studying, and to present that in a way that people can interact with it and learn from the videos. So that's istarvision.com. It's the letter I, starvision.com. And also, my wife and I are we work with cacao and seek to take up as much shelf space at health food stores as we can, stealing that away from lower vibe chocolate. And so that is Silver Moon Chocolate, and the website is silvermoonchocolate.com. And if you are in Asheville, then you can come and see. Right now, it's me working the booth at the farmers market every Saturday morning at UNC Asheville. That's a market from 8 to 12, and I run the chocolate booth, and I am at the beck and call of cacao and its mission to get into people and to help catalyze greater awakenings. And I also I do have a Qigong class that I'm teaching right now in Asheville. It's not well publicized, frankly, but I teach at Still Point Wellness in East Asheville on Monday evenings from 6:15 to 7:30, and we get into the layers of the energy and consciousness and physicality that we are. And that's, I consider Qigong kind of like a self-study research project on what we are. And, we just continue to get deeper into that. And it's beautiful. I have a handful of folks that come to that, and we just continue to deepen together. And hopefully we're going to be starting to do some workshops and possibly retreats, or at least adventures to the forest, and to do the practice out in the woods and activate and see what happens from that. We have a show in Asheville. If you're in real time seeing this, we have a show in Asheville on Saturday evening at the Center for Spiritual Living, and that's a benefit show for healers that have been showing up for people in the wake of Hurricane Helene. And we have a new album that's going to come out at some point. We have actually recorded a third album within the last 2 years, and it's going to be the best album that we've done. Just the sound quality is off the charts. We've worked with an incredibly talented producer, and he's brought our music to life in a way I never imagined. And even if the record never comes out, I still feel like so incredibly lucky that I got to work on, a record that reflects the words and the poetry and the message so beautifully. Yeah, I mean, I do social media, so well, I shouldn't really say that. I don't do social media.
You have a Telegram group.
I do have some Telegram. Yep, I got
The
some
Chocolate
Telegram.
Church Telegram group.
Yes, that's a Chocolate Church members group for sure. People that come to Chocolate Church, we create a group that we can interact online. And yeah,
I give that a shout out, because we were talking with some of the guys who were talking last night, and we're like, people need to know about Telegram. Telegram's so much better than all the other social media
I
spots.
agree, man.
Yeah.
Really, it's a whole different energy. It's not like I got back on Facebook and Instagram in the last little while, and I realized that it's literally geared to continually keep you in short attention span mode. Yep. And like as soon as you don't do anything, it refreshes. And really, it's kind of like how the internet used to be, where it's at your own discretion. Exactly. How you
there's no algorithm. That's the beauty of it.
Yep.
Because like we're talking about, how do you beat the algorithm? I guess Telegram, there is no algorithm. There's nothing to beat. You just put it up there and you see what's last.
Yep.
Yeah. Yeah. How about some final words of wisdom or inspiration for us
I was
before we
thinking maybe
part?
I share with y'all a poem it was written when I got back in 2003 from my adventure on the road, and this incredible transformation that I had undergone. And it was written between about November 2003, and I think I worked on it until about November 2004. So it was about a year of like the most potent transformative time of my life, and I was able to put it into a poem that I feel like reflects the mission and the sort of spiritual path that I have walked. It's called One and Only.
Nice.
I sing a song started very long ago. And yes, indeed, it is the one and only song I know. I never read the lyrics. Instead, learned from experience. It takes pleasure and pain to grow. This is serious. With an eye, blinking truth in Morse code. My horse implodes, paving smooth a course road. Less traveled, stretched saddle, reclined, redefined in breath scrabble. And the judges bring their best gavel. But all the verdicts simply sound to me a death rattle that turn us into wandering herds of beefing cattle. Of course, we're scared to swim. We stand on the beach and dabble. But now, something's going on in Babel. Down at the river crossing, I keep watch like Cupid, reaching in my quiver often, arrows conducive to realizing lucid dreams. In the cities, every traffic light is hues of green. And if my movements seem predictable, it's because I let far more than four shadows gleam around my physical. I am being human, part animal, part extraterrestrial, part vegetable, part mineral, part fungus, part mythical, the all subliminal. Pursuit is trivial only only if stride denies the rhythmical context, trying to ignore peripheral nonsense that steams from kettles of competition and conquest can be a contest. Until you address in one breath both Neo and Agent Smith, Luke, Yoda, Vader, and the Sith, ostensible opposites engaged in an adversarial relationship, endlessly struggling for a superior grip, sounds an awful lot like all creation myths, whispering simultaneous accounts of relative truth. But somewhere in a heart-shaped booth, soundproofed for stillness, my mind finds no need to listen longer. And peace grows stronger, and love grows stronger. Then, in the maze of mirrors, like a fountain of laser geometry, torching a forgotten mountain of graph paper, I comprehend the choreography, that there is no difference between the dance of myself and anything. Emerging from this trance, burning, an eagle with many wings, returning to a dreaming world immersed in self-denial and dualistic illusion, but choosing to stay awake. I am able to do, for I must be came to. And when I first came to, pissing where I slept, like a lioness stalking a shadow, I crept through columns of cryptic fire language, mystic Hebrew melodies, gospel visions hypnotic, Hopi, Dogon, Zulu, Cherokee, shaman's drums, splitting layered Lemurian perfect fifths, the ripe fruits of Islamic wisdom carved on Aboriginal Atlantean flutes, Mayan measures counting nothing but symbols like Celtic, Egyptian, and Hindu polyrhythms. And an oming Buddhist nods his head, sitting calmly with them In my prisms, I volley theisms. I volley theisms of ego-clenched policy, like pull and watch as patriarchal dirigibles fill, pregnant with pokes of my talons. I am Horus, soaring from future to past, at last, untied from sutures that lashed, to save the marriage of my parents. For it is not set in stone, more like engraved on our bones and carved into trumpets, piercing the walls of Jericho when blown from Zion's summits. I had to pass on fear-based belief systems. I would rather dare to know, keeping kids off my own misconceptions like any responsible grown-ass parent figure would do, helping him rise again when a son falls through a puddle of holy water spilled on sand by a playful daughter, enraptured in the music of bubbles. I hear a voice that struggles to surface, pure as the smoke of organic, homegrown sage. A nervous generation come to hear of its own age and purpose. Our children are born indigo, with atomic weights, heights, and depths radiating from thermonuclear hearts, conceived at fusion in self-lubricating parts, raised by the village. Brothers and sisters, finally free from pillage, basking in the glow of each other, chanting another name of God. I am you. I am you. I am you. The one and only song they ever knew.